My name is Olivia Baines. I'm 41 years old, a former U.S. Army captain with 14 years in intelligence operations. And I've been told I'm better at eavesdropping than belonging. Maybe that's true. I don't smile on cue, and I don't play nice when something smells wrong. But I can still hear what most people miss, even in the middle of a wedding. I didn't come here to be noticed. I came because not coming would make them talk more than if I showed up. My black dress was plain, my shoes scuffed, and my makeup non-existent. That made me dangerous, though no one in the garden knew it yet. Vanessa, my sister, walked down the aisle like a fashion editorial. Veil floating, custom gown. Everything about her said, I win. She didn't look at me until she passed my row. And even then, she didn't stop. She just leaned down, smiled like it hurt her cheeks, and whispered, "Still playing soldier?" It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal dressed in velvet. I didn't answer. I never do when silence says more. The garden ceremony glowed in soft gold. Champagne flutes, candlelight, soft laughter over string quartet music. A sea of curated perfection. And then I saw it. Mikhail, her new husband, tilted his head toward the man standing beside him, his father, a thick-set man with eyes that didn't blink often. Mikhail leaned in, said something in Russian. Not Moscow Russian, not textbook Russian, Rostov dialect, borderline slang, but I knew it. I had translated it before, during interrogations, during missions no one speaks of. I felt the hair on my neck rise. The phrase he used, "She suspects nothing. We deliver after the ceremony." My hand rose slowly, casually. To anyone else, I was adjusting an earring, but to me, I was activating something I hadn't used since I left the army. The mic hidden in my right ear clicked once, and I said one word, Perseus. That's it. No Hollywood theatrics, no dramatic music, just a signal, a whisper into the abyss, meant only for those still listening. 3 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up quietly outside the estate. 1 minute after that, I heard the thump of rotor blades, helicopter, and then they came. Interpol, FBI, Homeland, descending like a wave over the velvet tablecloths and crystal goblets. People screamed. A waiter dropped a silver tray. One woman fainted onto a pile of shrimp cocktails. Agents moved fast. No questions. No explanations. Mikhail was cuffed first, then his father, then 2 men I hadn't even noticed until that moment, both with Eastern European passports and fake smiles. Vanessa turned just as the handcuffs clicked shut around her groom's wrists. She froze. Her mouth fell open. Then she turned to me, slow, mechanical, and I saw something collapse behind her eyes. Not anger, not betrayal, something worse, recognition. I didn't move, I didn't smile, I didn't apologize, because I wasn't sorry. She stumbled backward, sat down hard on the edge of the fountain. She didn't know what I had heard, but she knew I heard something. And in that moment, surrounded by roses, designer heels, and half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, I became the one thing she couldn't outdress, outshine, or outtalk. I became the reckoning. 24 hours earlier, I was in my garage, sanding down the edge of a bench I'd been building for months. I didn't notice the mail until I stepped outside for a breath of air. There it was, thick, cream-colored, embossed. I didn't need to read the return address. Only Vanessa used perfume on paper. It was her wedding invitation. Tucked inside, a note from our mother. You don't have to come if it's too hard. But if you do, please no military talk. Let your sister have her day. Then a text from Dad. Just be normal, Liv. I stood with the envelope in my hand and laughed once. Quiet, more breath than sound. They weren't worried about me causing a scene. They were worried I'd remind people I still existed. I packed light. One black dress, low heels, my old dog tags, though I'd never wear them, and a small box. Inside, a matte black earpiece the size of a fingernail. Military issue. My last legal tool for my final op in Kinenrad. I kept it not because I needed it, but because I trust instinct more than luck. When I served, my job was to listen, to codes, to patterns, to the way a man says yes when he means no. Since coming home, all I've heard are apologies laced in guilt and praise that sounds like doubt. But something about this wedding felt wrong. It wasn't in the invitation. It was in how late it came, in how short the guest list was, in the fact that Mikhail Arsenov, a millionaire no one had ever heard of 2 years ago, was marrying my sister, and no one seemed curious about where he came from. So I RSVP'd. Alone. Not to watch her shine, but because something whispered, go, not to ruin anything. Just to make sure no one else did. I wasn't angry when I packed. I wasn't jealous or bitter or desperate to be seen. I was quiet and steady and aware of the weight in my pocket. Because if I've learned anything in 14 years of war, it's this. Sometimes justice doesn't knock. It listens. The moment I stepped into the rehearsal dinner, the air changed. You'd think walking into your own sister's wedding weekend would bring a smile, a hug, maybe a so glad you made it. But not this family, not my family. Instead, chairs shifted. Glasses froze mid-air. Conversations faltered and resumed, louder, like someone had turned up the volume to cover an awkward silence. Eyes swept over my black dress like it was body armor. And maybe, in some way, it was. No one said my name. No one offered a seat. But everyone saw me. Vanessa spotted me last. Her eyes widened just enough to register shock, then narrowed into performance mode. She gave me that tight-lipped grin people wear when they don't really want to use their lips at all. Then, with a flick of her French manicured fingers, she waved me into the circle of overdressed friends she'd been entertaining. This is my sister, Olivia, she announced. She used to be in the military. Now she's, growing herbs and listening to jazz. They laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was safe. One of them looked me up and down, then said, "That's so grounding of you. I wish I had time to be disconnected." I didn't respond. I didn't roll my eyes. I just nodded. And in silence, I studied them, like I used to study briefing slides. One glance, one read. Fragility under confidence. Perfection hiding rot. My chair was near the end of the long candlelit table. Not labeled, not decorated. But it was clearly the extra one, just in case the sister no one liked actually showed. It wobbled slightly on the uneven flagstone patio. I sat anyway. There were toasts, polished stories about love and new beginnings, laughter at curated memories. Most people clinked glasses, leaned in close for selfies. I sipped sparkling water and watched, listened. The stories about how Vanessa met Mikhail were rehearsed, and not a single one explained where he came from. Just phrases. A startup genius. International finance. Deeply connected. His friends said vague things like, Mikhail sees things others don't. They never said how they knew him. He didn't talk much, but his father did. A man with silver hair and tailored cuffs that looked like they'd never touched anything rough. He didn't eat much. He spoke slowly, clearly, with an accent that was faint, but wrong. Not European aristocracy. Older, deeper, Russian, polished in front, but with a weight that made my gut twitch. He watched me, not obviously, but enough. Like a man checking his back without turning around. The glance that says, I recognize the threat in the room. Midway through the meal, my mother leaned over, still smiling politely toward Vanessa's friends. Her voice didn't match her face. She whispered, "Lemon?" I nodded. That was the extent of our conversation. My father was quieter. He kept cutting his steak into pieces too small to chew. His eyes fixed on his plate like it had secrets in the mashed potatoes. Across from me sat a young woman with nervous hands. She reminded me of a field translator I once worked with in Kyrgyzstan. Always alert, always pretending not to be. When I caught her eyes, she looked away quickly, then back. I held her gaze just long enough for her to look down again. When dessert came, Vanessa raised a toast. To family, the ones who build you up, tear you down, and somehow always show up. Right, Liv? Everyone chuckled. I didn't blink. I raised my glass, tapped it once on the table. No words. Later, when I stepped away to the edge of the patio, I overheard a man ask Mikhail's father something about Russia. I couldn't make out the question, but I heard the answer clearly. People assume the world is divided into nations. It's not. It's divided into those who move quietly and those who don't. The man laughed, but the tone stuck to my skin like oil. That night, I lay on the guest bed in a house too big, too white, too quiet, and I kept replaying that voice, that accent, that phrase. I didn't know yet what they were planning, but I knew I'd be ready because I'd spent my whole life hearing what others miss, and they'd just handed me the first thread of a web they thought was invisible. They say the past never really goes away. I don't know if that's true, but some nights, when the silence stretches long and my fingers find the shape of the scar under my right rib, I remember Kinenrad. We weren't supposed to be there, not officially. It was a black op folded into another black op, disguised under humanitarian aid and backdoor parts acquisition. I was tasked with intercepting arms traffic disguised as medical equipment, routed through what looked like a shell company in northern Poland. I'd spent weeks posing as a rogue dealer, moving stolen NATO-grade components through an old port line. I wore a trench coat that smelled like diesel, drank coffee that tasted like ashes, and carried a silenced Glock inside a hollowed-out camera bag. It wasn't glamorous, it was cold, it was gray, and it was dangerous. The man they called Victor met me in an abandoned shipping hangar near the edge of the Kinenrad corridor. He was nervous, twitchy, but he wanted money, so he talked. He handed me a chipped flash drive wrapped in plastic, with coordinates and a single word. Sirius. That name had shown up on chatter once before, tied to encrypted transfers and cross-border trafficking of weapons components the U.S. hadn't even publicly acknowledged as real. I didn't know yet who Sirius was or what they were planning, but I knew it mattered. I got the drive out in a lipstick tube and sent it straight through an encrypted channel to our forward team in Wiesbaden. Then I waited. I didn't get silence. I got orders. Do not pursue. Hold your position. Someone will relieve you. The next morning, a senior intelligence liaison arrived. I won't say his name, not because I'm afraid, but because some names carry too much weight even now. He walked in without knocking, took off his gloves, and poured himself coffee using my cup. "You did your job, Baines," he said. "Now let it go." I told him what Victor had said. I told him I recognized some of the dialects he used. I laid out a 6-layer pattern that connected Eastern arms brokers to corporate shells in Canada and a political donor in New York. He sipped the coffee and stared at me like I was overexcited. "Careful, Captain," he said. "The more dots you connect, the more people start to wonder what you're really trying to do." That night, my report disappeared from the internal server. 2 weeks later, the Victor lead was declared non-actionable, and I was transferred. Quietly, without explanation, they buried the file, and they buried me with it. Back in the States, I tried to explain. I even told Vanessa once, on a day she actually returned my call. I remember standing in my kitchen, still smelling like airport terminals and chemical debrief wipes. I told her the basics, leaving out the blood, the static in my ear when the Glock misfired. The face of Victor when he realized he wasn't going to live long enough to regret helping me. She laughed. "You sure this isn't just some over-the-top spy fantasy, Liv?" Then she added, without meaning to be cruel. "You always had that wild streak. Maybe you just see things other people don't." That stuck with me. Maybe I do. Maybe I see things others don't. But I don't invent them. And I don't forget them. Kinenrad wasn't a story. It was a warning. A lesson in silence. A lesson in betrayal. That people who wear your uniform won't always have your back. That justice, once buried, doesn't scream. It waits. Quietly. Until the right name gets whispered. So when I saw Mikhail at the rehearsal dinner, whispering in that same Rostov dialect, using the same signal tones I once heard inside a freezing hangar beside the Baltic Sea, I didn't feel fear. I felt the pulse of recognition. The same way a soldier hears a distant mortar echo and knows before anyone else which direction to run. I knew I wouldn't sleep that night, so I stayed up, sitting by the window in that empty guest room, watching the wind comb through the hedges, watching shadows move the way shadows shouldn't. And in the silence, I thought about the buried file, the forgotten report, the warning that no one wanted to hear. I thought about Victor, about the final coordinates, about the way the agency smiled and told me to be quiet, and I thought, maybe they buried me too soon, because ghosts don't die. They adapt, and some of them come home dressed in black, silent, but listening, waiting. If my mother was the echo of this family, loud, polished, always rehearsed, then my father was the silence between words. Growing up, I used to think his quiet was strength, The way he stood in rooms without needing to announce himself. The way he could make a point by simply looking out the window mid-conversation, as if the answer had been there all along. But as I got older, I realized silence is not always virtue. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's complicity. The morning of the wedding, I found him alone in the breakfast room, nursing coffee that had long gone cold. The light slanted across the floor in sharp stripes, and the air smelled faintly of citrus and starch. He didn't look up when I walked in, just nodded once, as if I were a house guest, as if I hadn't once called him my rock, in a fifth-grade essay that made it to the school newsletter. I poured my own coffee, sat down across from him. We didn't speak for a full minute. Then he said in that low voice that always made me lean forward to hear, "Just keep things simple today, Olivia. No stories, no references." I didn't ask what he meant. I knew. He meant no talk of deployments. No questions about why I walked with a slight favor in my left leg. No mention of Kinenrad, Syria, or Germany. No nods to why I sometimes flinched at ice cracking in glasses. "I wasn't planning to start a fight, Dad," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I know," he replied, still staring into his mug. "But some people don't need a fight to feel attacked." He looked up then, and for a brief second, our eyes met. And in that space, I saw it. A flicker. Not fear, not exactly, but concern. Wariness. Like he was walking a tightrope I didn't know existed. He turned toward the window. From where he sat, he could see the terrace. Mikhail was out there, laughing with one of his groomsmen. That laugh, too precise. Like it had been practiced. My father's jaw clenched just slightly. "You don't trust him," I said quietly. He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. It was enough. That one beat of hesitation, of tight lips and stiff shoulders, was more than he'd given about any man Vanessa had ever dated. I almost said something then. Something about instincts. About how sometimes the same shiver you get before a storm is the one you get before a bullet. But I stopped myself. Because that wasn't our language. Our language had always been silence, implication, deflection, and once, many years ago, denial. The memory crept in without warning. I was 28. A whistleblower from a drone surveillance program had accused me of falsifying logs. The entire case was baseless, manufactured from manipulated footage. But it had enough traction that internal review launched a formal inquiry. For 2 months, I was benched. My security clearance was under review. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I started questioning myself. Then one day, I was summoned to a classified debrief at Fort Belvoir. I showed up to find my father already seated inside, in a suit he hadn't worn since my college graduation. Next to him, a colonel I barely recognized, and a lawyer I definitely didn't. I wasn't asked any questions, no explanations, no defense. Just handed a folder stamped "Case Closed," and then ushered out. It wasn't until months later, after the smoke cleared, that I learned my father had intervened. Quietly, off-book, through a friend of a friend who owed him a favor. He told me afterward, "Our family doesn't need scandals. You're better than that." I just wanted it to go away. But it didn't go away for me. I carried that silence like a weight, a permission to vanish the truth if it was inconvenient. And now, sitting across from him again, years later, I wondered if that same instinct to make it go away was stirring in him again. Except this time, it wasn't about protecting me. It was about protecting the image, the wedding, the family, the illusion that we were one unit, one proud name printed in gold on every invitation. "I'll behave," I told him, my voice level. "But I won't lie." He looked at me again, eyes tired, sad. Just, "Don't be seen." And that was the truth, wasn't it? That's what he wanted. For me to disappear so the story could go on without complication. I smiled faintly. "I've been invisible for years, Dad," I said. "Don't worry, I know how to stay in the shadows. I've always believed evil doesn't shout. It doesn't wear black capes or twist mustaches. It blends, it smiles, it gets invited to weddings, and sometimes it wears jewelry." It was during the family brunch the day before the ceremony. Light streamed through the tall windows. Everyone was dressed in shades of champagne and ivory. Even I tried to play along. Gray slacks, a fitted blazer, simple flats. Mikhail sat across from me, diagonally, laughing easily, holding Vanessa's hand like he meant it. But something tugged at my peripheral vision. A glint, a glimmer at his collarbone. At first, I thought it was just a pendant. But when he leaned forward to pour Vanessa another mimosa, I got a clear look. It wasn't a necklace. It was a USB, no logo, matte finish, thick and slightly curved at the end, almost like a capsule. But I'd seen that design before. Years ago, in Kinenrad. I forced myself not to react, not to blink too long. I turned to reach for the fruit bowl and casually shifted my line of sight. One glance, then two, confirming shape, scale, and design. This wasn't some luxury tech trinket. This was custom hardware, used only in high-level operations, the kind that didn't store vacation photos or spreadsheets, the kind that encrypted files in triple-layered shells, often with location-based triggers. One wrong move, and whatever was inside would vanish into hash. My heart didn't race. It never does anymore, but my fingertips did feel colder as I wiped them on a napkin. The last time I saw a device like that was during the Victor sting, on the neck of a buyer we never identified. The photo we retrieved was grainy. The man was mid-turn, half obscured by shadow, but the silhouette had been saved in my brain like a scar. And this was him, or his brother, or his handler. Mikhail shifted again. His hand reached for his collar briefly, fingertips brushing the USB like someone touching a crucifix for reassurance. Why would a tech millionaire wear a data drive around his neck? Unless that drive was more valuable than any bank account. Unless it was the final link. The end of the chain we'd lost years ago. I remembered that final Kinenrad debrief. How the agency had downplayed everything. Unsubstantiated. Not actionable. They said we couldn't tie the signal architecture to any living source. No names, no hierarchy, just static. But what if Mikhail wasn't just a loose end? What if he was the lock? And that drive was the key. I stared at my plate, let the voices around me blur. Toasts were made, people laughed. Vanessa leaned over to show off her new engagement ring to someone who'd already seen it 3 times. And I sat there, listening for accents, measuring rhythms, dissecting body language like I used to dissect battlefield terrain. He was comfortable, too comfortable. No man hiding that kind of tech should have looked that at ease. Unless he thought no one at this table could possibly recognize what he carried. Unless he'd been told that the only person who could had already been discredited, already made invisible. Me. I excused myself gently, said I needed to call in for a work check-in. No one stopped me, no one ever does. Back in the guest room, I opened my travel bag and pulled out the folded image I'd kept. One still frame from that Kinenrad sting. Blurred. A shadow behind foggy glass, a neck, a jaw, and that same curve of a USB pendant. I'd held onto it not for proof, but for intuition. The kind you can't report. The kind that whispers when the logic fails. I laid the photo next to my tablet and pulled up Mikhail's engagement announcement. Pressed them side by side. The angle wasn't perfect, the lighting different, but the posture, the build, the ear placement, not a match I could take to court, but enough to light up every fiber in my gut that had ever saved my life. I leaned back. So, was Mikhail just a charismatic entrepreneur, conveniently connected to international markets? Or had my sister fallen for a man who sat at the center of a web I'd once tried to unravel? Was he the final node, the payload, the last ghost from Kinenrad? Outside, I heard laughter. My sister's voice rising in the breeze, the clinking of glasses, the lie of happiness echoing through the garden. I closed the laptop, tucked the photo away. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I had something better. I had memory, and I had time. Not much, but enough. Vanessa found me on the veranda, her heels clicking too sharply against the flagstone. Her veil gathered in one hand like a flag of truce she didn't really mean to wave. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, jaw clenched, watching me. I had my back to the railing, my hands folded loosely in front of me. Behind her, the wedding preparations buzzed like distant artillery. Folding chairs, string lights, florists arranging white orchids with surgical precision. "You always do this," she finally said. "Do what?" I kept my voice level. "Make everything heavy," her voice rose like steam. This is my wedding, Olivia. Not a tactical op, not a battlefield, not another one of your missions. I looked past her to the garden where Mikhail stood, his laugh too rehearsed. And if it turns out to be all of them at once? Her nostrils flared. You're impossible. No, I said gently. I'm consistent. She paced 2 steps away, then back again, gripping the veil tighter. Do you know how hard it is for me to invite you to anything? How exhausting it is to wait for the moment you turn every family gathering into a case file? I took a slow breath. Vanessa, I didn't come here to ruin your day, but I'm seeing things, details, that don't add up. Things that remind me of places you've never been. Exactly, she snapped, stepping closer. Places I've never been, and don't want to be. Not everyone wants to crawl through war zones or sleep with a gun under their pillow. I let the words land. She was right, but not in the way she meant. You think I chose this, I said. You think I wanted to trade birthday cakes for classified reports. That I enjoy not knowing who I can trust, even in my own family. She shook her head. This isn't about you. No, I said. But it might be about who you're marrying. Her face changed, just slightly. A flicker of something she couldn't hide, doubt. I'm not accusing him of anything yet, I added. I'm just saying there's something familiar about him. And the device he wears around his neck isn't a fashion statement. It's used to encrypt high-value data, files we've only ever seen trafficked in intelligence circles. Vanessa crossed her arms, the veil slipping down her forearm. God, Olivia, you don't even hear yourself. Do you think maybe you're just jealous? That I get to have something normal for once, while you're still living out of a duffel bag? That hurt more than I wanted it to. But I didn't let it show. I just looked at her, the girl I used to protect from spiders and schoolyard bullies. The woman who now stood in front of me dressed in white, trembling not from joy, but from the pressure of a perfect day colliding with a truth she didn't want to face. I want you to be happy, I said quietly. But I also want you to be safe. Her voice cracked. He loves me. I'm not questioning that, I said. But loving someone doesn't erase who they were before they met you. She stepped back. You always have to turn every man I care about into some sort of suspect. That's not true, isn't it? She fired back. You think you're the only one who's been hurt? The only one who's had to rebuild? Just because you walk around with medals doesn't mean you're the only one with scars. I froze, because I'd never heard her admit that. Not once. You think I don't remember the day Mom found your field uniform in the trash, she said. The way you came home after Kinenrad, silent, thin, shaking like a broken thing. I sat outside your door for 3 hours, Olivia, and you never even opened it. That memory, sharp as glass. I thought she hadn't noticed. I'd wanted to protect her from the worst of me, but maybe all I did was shut her out. I wasn't ready, I said. I was trying to unsee things I can never unsee. Her shoulders sank. I don't need protection today, she said. I need my sister, not the soldier. Just the woman who used to teach me how to build pillow forts. I let the silence sit there, then I nodded once. I'll be what you need, I said. But if I find out something's wrong, I won't stay quiet. She didn't answer. She just walked away, veil trailing like smoke behind her. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, fingers curled around a matte black case that could be mistaken for a pillbox to anyone else. I opened it slowly, habit, not necessity. Inside, nestled in foam, was the earpiece. It looked like nothing, smaller than my pinky nail, but it had heard things, dangerous things, things that had kept people alive. I placed it in my right ear, took a breath, and tapped the tiny switch behind the lobe. Static, then silence, then the low, comforting hum of calibration. There was something ritualistic about it, like soldiers used to polishing boots before a mission, or priests lighting incense before confession. The room around me was still. Through the window, I could see rows of white folding chairs, now empty, catching the last of the afternoon sun. A breeze lifted the corner of the bride's tablecloth and let it fall again. I whispered a single word to test the mic channel. Alive. The vibration returned instantly, proof the transmission system still worked. No one was listening yet, but they could be. The equipment was technically legal. Technically. Issued during a joint cyber intelligence op 3 years ago, and never officially recalled. Not because they forgot, because someone, somewhere, decided I might still need it. And they were right. I adjusted the angle and laid back on the bed, my hair fanning across the sheets. The earpiece clicked faintly as it recalibrated to ambient noise, and in that quiet I remembered. Not the medals or the after-action reports, but a single moment 7 years ago, Kandahar province. The back of a van converted into a mobile listening post. I had been stationed with a linguistics team, young, overeager recruits who didn't yet understand that the most dangerous things are said the softest. That day, a routine scan picked up a burst transmission from a secure channel. 15 seconds of whispered Russian, encoded, layered, fragmentary. Everyone missed it, except me. One word, barely audible, was wrong. It was a dialect we weren't trained on. Not standard military lingo, not even classic FSB, but I knew it. My grandmother used to say it when she cooked. Skory. It meant swift. But in this dialect, in that context, it wasn't just descriptive. It was a code. I stood up mid-briefing and radioed it in as a Class A trigger. Got laughed at for 5 full minutes by a lieutenant who thought I was being dramatic. 6 hours later, a convoy carrying a captured American major was rerouted. That convoy never made it to its original destination, because I'd heard something no one else could. And that major, his name was Trent Morrison. He sends me a Christmas card every year. Writes in blue ink. Always ends with "still here, still grateful." I'm not great with guns. I'm a decent shot. But I never took pride in pulling the trigger. But I can listen. I listen well enough to survive. And sometimes, well enough to stop a war before it starts. Now, lying in a hotel room on the eve of my sister's wedding, I tuned my hearing into background voices. Mikhail's laugh drifted through the air ducts. The clink of glass. Snippets of music. Someone's perfume lingering too long. I whispered another word to test volume. Perseus. Nothing yet. Just a signal check. But the muscles in my shoulders relaxed. Because now I wasn't just guessing anymore. Now I was listening. And when people don't know you're listening, they tell the truth. The ceremony had ended. White petals blanketed the ground. Champagne flutes clinked as the newlyweds posed for photographs beneath a silk archway. I stood in the shadows, near a cluster of potted palms just off the reception tent, pretending to adjust my shoe. The earpiece stayed warm in my ear, quiet but alert. It had picked up scattered conversations all afternoon, laughter, flirting, toasts. And then, something different. I caught the cadence before the words, that distinct hush when people believe no one is listening. Followed by Russian. Not the theatrical kind you learn from language apps, but the clipped business-like tongue I remembered from black market backrooms. Она ничего не подозревает. Доставьте груз после свадьбы. She suspects nothing. Deliver the package after the wedding. Mikhail's voice, low, confident. I froze. He was close, maybe behind the catering tent. I imagined him leaning toward his father, Sergei, the man with the silver beard and the unnerving stillness of someone who'd seen enough to stop flinching. There was a long pause, then another line, softer, harder to catch. I closed my eyes and focused. Use the diversion at midnight. Clean exit. It wasn't small talk. It wasn't harmless. It was operational language. I opened my eyes slowly. A server passed with a tray of stuffed mushrooms. I took one I didn't want, nodded politely, and stepped away. I didn't need more proof. Not really, but I knew how this worked. Accusations without backup would bounce off these people like rubber bullets. My family wouldn't believe me. Vanessa would think I was spiraling again, paranoid, dramatic. They never understood that being careful wasn't the same as being afraid. I ducked into the house through the side entrance, bypassing the crowded hallway. Found an empty guest room and locked the door behind me. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, letting the white noise of the reception fade beneath the hum in my ear. My pulse stayed steady, my breath slow. This wasn't panic. This was protocol. I thought about the phrase, deliver the package. It sounded benign, almost mundane. But we both knew better. The word package had shown up in at least 3 intercepted dossiers over the past 18 months. Always in conjunction with encrypted file movements. Always timed near global summits or high-profile security events. I'd seen this play before, and I knew what came next. Something would be moved, something dangerous. Data, money, leverage, maybe even personnel. And the wedding was the distraction. The irony wasn't lost on me. Vanessa wanted a fairy tale. And she'd walked straight into an espionage screenplay. I stood up and straightened my jacket. Time to make the call, but not yet. Not while champagne was still being poured and cake was still being sliced. I had to be sure no one got caught in the fallout, especially not Vanessa. She may have doubted me, even mocked me, but she didn't deserve to be collateral. I glanced in the mirror. My face looked calm, professional, unreadable. Then I whispered into the mic, voice low enough not to carry. Confirming chatter, code flag, level 3, eyes on groom and father, possible handoff post-ceremony, will signal on activation. There was a click in my ear, acknowledgement. No questions, no delay. They trusted me. That was more than I could say for my own family. I waited until the second toast. Vanessa's friend from college was giving a sentimental speech. Something about fairy tales, fate, and diamonds as strong as love. Everyone's eyes were on the couple. Champagne sparkled in the twilight. I slipped out through the tent flap unnoticed, moving along the outer edge of the property, where the hedges were tall enough to shield me. My heels dug slightly into the grass, but I kept walking, steady, controlled. At the edge of the garden, I stopped beside a wrought iron statue of an angel. I could still hear the speech, muffled now, like a radio left in the other room. I reached up and tapped the side of my right ear. The earpiece chirped twice, one for audio confirmation, another for direct relay. And then I whispered it, just one word. Perseus. To anyone else it would sound like nothing. A name, maybe, a mistake. But to the right ears, in the right frequency, it meant one thing. Activate silent net. For 37 months, that word had stayed dormant. I'd never said it aloud, never even written it down. But it was encoded into a list known only to 5 people. People who still believed that intelligence wasn't just about gathering secrets, but knowing when to act on them. Perseus wasn't just a myth. It was a protocol. Cold War era. Revised after 9/11. Reinforced after the Kiev cyber leak. The moment I spoke it, a chain reaction began. No dramatic music, no immediate explosions, just a hum, inaudible to anyone else but me, that said the system was listening. I stepped back into the reception tent. Mikhail was laughing with a guest. His father was speaking to the caterer. Vanessa was nowhere in sight, probably adjusting her makeup or redoing her curls for the 5th time. They had no idea. They were still in the warm glow of the evening, still posing for photographs, still sipping rosé. And I was timing the storm. Exactly 63 minutes after I whispered Perseus, I saw it, reflected in the glass doors behind the cake table, a black SUV, no markings, followed by another, then a third, no sirens, no lights. These weren't local police. They weren't military either. They were something in between. Interpol, with 2 agents embedded in a joint US-Euro op, silent entry protocol. No uniforms, no flash, just precision. I stayed near the back, beside the floral arch, pretending to be on my phone. My hands were steady, my breath even. I watched Mikhail clink glasses with Sergei. Their body language was relaxed, too relaxed. And that's when I knew they thought they'd won. They thought I'd faded back into civilian life, into the noise of farmers' markets and slow jazz playlists. They thought I'd buried Kinenrad in the same box where I kept my discharge papers. But I hadn't. Because the thing about people like me, the so-called useless soldiers, the ones mocked, discarded, underestimated, we don't need fanfare. We need one chance. Just one. Perseus had bought me 60 minutes. And now, it would buy justice. Behind me, a pair of agents slipped in through the service door. They didn't look like agents. They looked like wedding guests. Blazers, pastel shirts, quiet shoes. But I saw the earpieces, the posture, the gaze. They didn't nod at me, didn't need to. I walked back toward the bar and picked up a flute of sparkling cider. The room felt different now. The air was tighter, conversation slowed. Somewhere, someone sensed the shift. The atmosphere had turned. One of the agents was speaking with the venue manager. The other moved toward Sergei, casually, like an old friend. I glanced at Mikhail. He had just noticed the shift too. A tiny crease formed above his eyebrow. That was all I needed. I turned my back and walked away, slowly, purposefully. And in my ear, a soft voice crackled to life. Perseus confirmed. Units in position, green light. I didn't smile, but inside, I felt it. That cold, focused resolve of a soldier who had just watched the trap close. And no one else even knew the game had started. You may now kiss the bride. The crowd cheered. Glasses clinked. Vanessa leaned in, veil brushing her shoulder. Mikhail dipped her slightly, camera ready, teeth bared in a perfect rehearsed grin. And then, it happened. A sound cut through the music. Not loud, but sharp. Mechanical, precise. Whoop, whoop, whoop. A helicopter, then another. Guests turned their heads upward in confusion. Some laughed, assuming it was part of the celebration. Maybe a surprise flyover or romantic gesture. This was a luxury wedding after all. Nothing was out of the question. I didn't move. I kept my position at the edge of the aisle, eyes on Mikhail, tracking the shift in his expression. It took less than a second. His mouth froze mid-kiss. His brow twitched. His fingers clenched around Vanessa's waist. He knew. Another second passed. Then, movement. 2 men near the third row stood and stepped forward. Not wedding guests, not ushers. One reached for his jacket. The other pulled a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Everyone remained calm. There was no time for calm. Screams erupted from the left side of the aisle. A woman dropped her champagne. A man stepped in front of his wife protectively. Phones flew up, trying to record and retreat at the same time. From the far end of the garden, black-clad agents stormed in. Badges raised, weapons holstered but ready. They moved like shadows across a white tablecloth. Efficient, trained, exact. Mikhail spun toward his father, who had already begun to back away, too late. Sergei was caught mid-step by 2 agents in dark gray suits. They grabbed his wrists, forced him to the ground. The old man didn't struggle. He just stared at me as he went down. His expression wasn't fear. It was recognition. He knew who I was now. Across the aisle, Mikhail tried to push Vanessa behind him. But another agent was already on him, seizing his arm, twisting it behind his back. Hands behind your head. What is this? You have no right. You're under arrest for international conspiracy to commit espionage, laundering illicit data transfers, and multiple counts of cyber-related terrorism. You have the right to remain silent, Vanessa screamed. Stop! Stop! What are you doing? This is my husband. She ran toward them, heels slipping on the grass, makeup streaking with tears. I took a step forward, gently caught her by the wrist. Don't, she turned to me, wild-eyed. You did this. What did you do? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Behind her, 3 more guests were pulled aside. 2 men, 1 woman. All linked to shell corporations flagged by Interpol last year. All wearing smiles moments ago. Now pale, now silent. The ceremony was over. The fantasy, over. Homeland Security agents began securing the perimeter. Guests were escorted away from the aisle. The band had stopped playing. One of the groomsmen fainted. And me, I stood in the center of it all, untouched. Still in the same black dress, still wearing the same earrings. My mic was silent now, mission complete. Vanessa was on her knees, mascara bleeding down her face. I didn't feel triumph, only gravity, like a storm had passed. And I was the only one who'd remembered to board up the windows. I crouched beside her, speaking softly. I didn't come here to ruin your wedding, Vanessa, but I couldn't let you marry into a lie. She stared at me like I'd betrayed her, but I hadn't. I'd saved her, even if she couldn't see it yet. From the hill above, the helicopters hovered, silent now, watching. Justice had arrived, in handcuffs and tactical boots. And the little girl who once got left behind on family vacations. She'd just taken back her name. They had Mikhail pinned against the fountain wall, his arms wrenched behind him. The carved marble cherubs dribbled water beside his face like they were crying too. One agent read the charges again, slower this time, like he needed Mikhail to hear every word. Mikhail wasn't listening. He was staring at me, not with anger, not with disbelief, with something more intimate. His eyes narrowed, his mouth twisted. Then he said it. Olivka, Tuvan's song. Not English, not Russian either. It was Kaliningrad field dialect, bastardized Russian spliced with military slang. A voice from a time no one was supposed to remember. And he used my field name, Olivka. Only 3 people ever called me that. One was dead. One was rotting in a Lithuanian prison. And the third, he was now in handcuffs, bleeding from his temple, remembering a woman he once met in the back alley of a Baltic smuggler's compound. He hadn't recognized me until now, until everything had already collapsed. I took a step forward. He looked at me like I was a ghost. "You were dead," he muttered. "We thought, after the raid." I said nothing. My silence was answer enough. Behind me, Vanessa's voice broke through the chaos. She was screaming, louder than the sirens, louder than the agent's commands. "You knew her," she stumbled forward, heels snapping against the tile. Her veil twisted across one shoulder. Her hands trembled, pointing from Mikhail to me and back again. "You knew her?" she screamed, her voice cracking, but Mikhail didn't look at her. He kept his eyes locked on mine, as if I was the only person in the entire garden who still existed. Vanessa collapsed to her knees beside him, not to protect him, but to try and make sense of it all. Her fingers dug into her perfectly pressed gown. Her shoulders shook, not from sadness, but disorientation. I'd seen that look before, in debrief rooms, in war zones. It was the face someone made when the truth didn't just hurt. It unmade their entire world. She didn't cry for her husband. She cried for the life she thought she had, for the illusion now reduced to police reports, extradition paperwork, and a ceremony that would never reach its honeymoon. Mikhail leaned forward, his cheek brushing the stone. "Why now, Olivka?" he asked softly. "You could have ended me long ago." I didn't answer, because the truth would have hurt more than silence. The truth was, I hadn't ended him then, because I thought someone else would. The truth was, I'd tried to walk away, grow tomatoes, listen to Nina Simone, live slow. But then the invitation came, and I saw his name, and I knew some debts don't expire. I stepped closer, crouching just enough for him to hear me clearly. "No one escapes forever, Mikhail." He blinked, like he wanted to say more, but I was already standing again. Vanessa reached for my arm. I pulled away. She wasn't ready for anything I could say. Maybe she never would be. I left her kneeling beside the man she thought she'd spend a lifetime with. A man who'd trafficked silence, peddled secrets, and called me by a name that belonged to another life. I walked past the overturned chairs, past the trampled white petals, past the discarded champagne flutes, one step at a time, not rushing, not turning back. Let the others process the evidence. Let the prosecutors argue motive. Let the press speculate how a wedding turned into a federal sting. My part was done. Justice didn't always arrive in a courtroom. Sometimes it arrived in a whisper, in a code word, in the way a traitor's mouth fell open when he realized the woman he underestimated was the one who ended him. Olivka was dead. But Olivia Baines walked away, whole. The reception tent had emptied. Half-drunk glasses lined the linen tables. Flower petals clung to the soles of my shoes as I walked toward the gravel path behind the house. I didn't expect them to follow, but I heard my mother's heels before I saw her. She was still in her champagne-colored dress, though it now clung awkwardly to her frame, creased, dirt-smudged, unglamorous. "You ruined it," she hissed. I turned slightly, just enough to see her expression. That was her wedding, her only wedding. I stayed quiet. Let the silence bloom between us. She stepped closer. Her voice cracked. "I don't care what he did or who he was. You could have waited. One more hour, one day, just one." I let her words hang in the air like smoke. Behind her, I saw my father approaching, slower, less furious, more calculating. He was always better at waiting. "She trusted you," my mother said. "And look what you did." Finally, I faced her fully. "She didn't trust me," I said calmly. "She mocked me." "You embarrassed the entire family." I glanced down at her hands. They were trembling, not with grief, but rage. "I exposed a trafficker," I said. She didn't flinch. "She'll never forgive you," she said. I didn't answer, because just then, my father stepped up beside her and placed a hand on her arm. She backed away slowly, still fuming, but quiet now. He turned toward me. His eyes didn't burn. They studied. You knew before you arrived, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. I did. He took a breath. How long before that? My throat tightened. But I kept my voice level. Since before she called me useless. He didn't react, just nodded slowly, like the weight of the answer matched a burden he'd long suspected but never asked about. Kinenrad, he asked. I nodded again. I saw him, I said. Only for a moment. Then his trail went cold, until the wedding invitation showed up. My father looked toward the dark horizon, the lake reflecting the spinning lights of law enforcement vehicles across the lawn. She'll hate you for this. I can live with that, I said. Can you? He didn't respond. And that silence, that pause, was louder than my mother's shouting. I stepped around them, walking toward the garden gate. Where are you going? My mother called after me. Back to the hotel, I said. You're not staying here? I looked over my shoulder. No, I was never really here. And I meant it. Not just tonight. Not just at the wedding. I hadn't belonged in this family for years. Maybe never. I'd been tolerated, not trusted. Pitied, not praised. I'd been the uncomfortable reminder that life was messy, complicated, dangerous. That justice was ugly and personal. That silence didn't always mean peace. And now I had done the one thing no one in this family had ever had the stomach to do. I told the truth. Out loud. In public. At the worst possible time. And in doing so, I had made them all see what they'd been pretending not to. As I passed through the side gate, I caught my father's voice behind me. Olivia, I paused, but didn't turn around. I don't agree with how you did it, he said. But I saw it in his eyes too. I nodded once. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get from him, and maybe it was enough. By the time I got back to my hotel room, my phone had already begun to vibrate. Not with calls, but with notifications. Buzzing in rapid succession like a warning drumbeat I couldn't ignore. It wasn't until I opened one of the messages that I saw what had happened. Someone had live-streamed the arrest. A wedding guest, probably one of Vanessa's influencer friends, had recorded everything, from the helicopter blades slicing the air to the exact moment Mikhail was pushed to the ground, cuffs clicking around his wrists. Her caption read, "WTF is happening. This was supposed to be a champagne brunch." In the video, I stood near the back of the tent, unmoved, silent, almost unnoticeable. Almost. Except one frame caught me lifting my hand briefly to touch my earring, right before all hell broke loose. That frame was screenshotted, zoomed in, and paired with an arrow that read, "She knew." It took less than 3 hours for the clip to go viral. By morning, I was trending, but not as a hero, not yet. I was the woman who ruined a wedding. The cold sister, the military freak, and worse, attention seeker, fame chaser, overkill. One headline read, "Sister or Spy." The wedding sting that went too far. Another, "Couldn't she wait till the cake?" Thousands of comments followed. Some were just jokes. Memes of me edited into war movies, wedding cakes exploding behind me. Others were crueler. "She wanted to be the center of attention," one read. "Some people just can't stand to see others happy." It should have hurt, but it didn't. Because underneath the noise, something else started to ripple. Someone, somewhere, must have recognized Mikhail's face. Or maybe it was his father's. Whatever the reason, by midday, old intelligence logs from Kinenrad surfaced online. Redacted documents, names of known aliases, a few blurry photos from my operation 3 years ago. And in one of them, I was there. Back turned, shadowed, blurred beyond recognition. But still, it didn't take long for the internet to do what it always does. They called me the faceless whistleblower. Others, the black-dressed soldier. Even Reddit had a thread titled, "Who's the woman in black?" I didn't answer. I didn't comment. I didn't confirm or deny. Because I didn't need to. Somewhere in the noise, the truth was working its way through. Not the clean, polished kind of truth that fits neatly into press releases, but the raw, jagged kind, the one that doesn't need permission to exist. Vanessa texted me once, just one sentence. "You always had to be the star." I stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it. No reply, because I wasn't the star. I was the shadow at the edge of the frame, the whisper that cracked the silence. The one no one invited, but everyone remembered. That night, I went down to the hotel bar, ordered ginger ale, no alcohol. My head needed to stay clear. The bartender looked at me, paused, then said, "You're her, aren't you?" I didn't ask what he meant. He tapped his phone, showing me the clip. Paused it on the frame where I touched my earring. "Was it real?" he asked. I looked at him, then at the screen, then back again. I didn't smile. "It was necessary," I said. He nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "you got guts." I left a good tip. Walked back to my room. The hallway was quiet, but something in me wasn't, because I knew what came next. This wasn't over. Not for Mikkel, not for Vanessa, not for me. The internet would move on, as it always did. The headlines would fade. The hashtags would get buried under new scandals. But the truth, what I saw, what I heard, what I chose to act on, that would stay with me. And with those who were finally paying attention. It came 2 weeks later in a cream-colored envelope with no return address. No handwriting on the outside, just my name. Tucked inside was a single folded sheet of paper. Nothing fancy. Lined notebook paper, like something a teenager might write on. But the handwriting, I'd know it anywhere. Vanessa's. I didn't open it right away. I set it on my desk, beside a worn paperback and a half-full mug of chamomile tea. I stared at it as the sun shifted across the wood grain. Hours passed. Eventually, I unfolded it. The letter was short, barely a paragraph. "Olivia, I was wrong about you. And I was even more wrong about myself. I don't know what else to say right now, but I needed you to know that. V, no excuses. No demands, no plea for forgiveness. Just a line of confession, scrawled in slightly shaky ink." I folded the paper again, slowly, pressing each crease like it might hold something more than words. But it didn't. It was just paper. And yet, it felt heavier than that. I didn't cry. I didn't feel vindicated. There was no triumphant swell of justice in my chest. No cinematic moment of closure. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles when the war is done, but the wreckage still lies around you. For days, I kept the letter tucked in the back of my bookshelf, behind an old training manual. I wasn't sure why I didn't throw it away. Maybe part of me knew I wasn't done reading it yet. Not just the words, but the silence between them. There's a kind of apology that doesn't ask for response. It just arrives. Uninvited, undemanding. And I respected that. Because the truth is, Vanessa had been wrong. But she hadn't been evil. She had loved blindly, trusted recklessly. She had built a world out of beautiful things and refused to see the cracks until they swallowed her whole. That wasn't malice. That was human. And for years, I had carried my own silence too. I had watched our family keep secrets for the sake of appearances. I had swallowed my own warnings, my own pain, because I didn't want to be too much, too military, too intense, too inconvenient. I had let them treat my sacrifice as a shadow, an afterthought. And I had let it eat away at me until I didn't, until I acted, not out of revenge, but out of duty. And somewhere in that line between silence and explosion, something inside me shifted. I started gardening again, the real kind, with dirt under my nails and sore shoulders by sunset. I planted dill and thyme and a strange lemon balm that grew too fast for its own roots. I took my jazz records out of storage and played them low in the evenings, sipping tea, letting the vinyl crackle fill the empty corners. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I didn't. One morning, I walked to the farmer's market and someone tapped me on the shoulder. An older woman. Warm smile. Soft voice. "You're the one from the wedding, right?" she asked. The woman in black. I hesitated. But she didn't wait for an answer. She squeezed my hand. "Good work," she whispered. Then she walked away. I never got her name, but I carried that moment with me. Just like I carried the letter. Just like I carried Kinenrad. Not as burdens, as reminders. Reminders that justice isn't always loud. That courage sometimes looks like quiet choices made when no one is watching. That sometimes the hardest part isn't taking the shot. It's standing still and letting the truth land where it needs to. I didn't write back to Vanessa, not because I was angry, but because her letter didn't ask for anything. And for once, I didn't feel obligated to give more than I already had. I let the silence speak. Because in the end, some answers don't need words. Some peace is built in quiet. And I had finally found mine. I opened the small iron box at the back of my closet. The lock creaked like it hadn't been touched in years. Maybe it hadn't. Inside were pieces of my former life, a folded map of Kinenrad, my worn military ID card, edges curled from sweat and weather, a cassette tape marked with a black X, and now, Vanessa's letter. I didn't hesitate. I slipped it in, right on top, then closed the lid. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about preserving, about sealing a chapter that didn't deserve to be erased, but also didn't need to be relived. You see, people think stories like mine end in courtrooms or breaking news headlines, but that's rarely true. Sometimes they end in a quiet room, with jazz playing low and the weight of memory resting like a hand on your shoulder. I didn't need applause. I didn't need to be called a hero. I didn't even need Vanessa to apologize. Because the truth is, justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about clarity, about knowing finally that you did the right thing, even when no one stood beside you, even when the people you loved most, your own blood, called you paranoid, dramatic, inconvenient. But now I sit with peace. My name is Olivia Baines. I served my country, I served my family, and I served the truth. That's enough. I don't need their recognition. Because this time, I didn't have to pull the trigger. I didn't have to fire a single shot. I just had to listen and speak at the right moment, and that changed everything. I closed the box, placed it back on the shelf, and turned off the light. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, the same way it did in Kinenrad the night I nearly died. The same way it did when I buried my uniform in the back of my closet and told myself I was done. But I wasn't done. I was just beginning a different mission, one where silence could be more powerful than noise. Before we say goodbye, I have one last question for you. Where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today, wherever you are. I hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.